Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And today on the show, we are talking about Thrawn Ascendancy, Greater Good by Timothy Zahn. So we are going to be going into a full spoiler discussion on the newest book from Del Rey Publishing, and I'm very excited. Sarah, it's been a couple months since we did a book review, at least 2 months since Victory's Price. We're back, and better than ever, and full of many a Google Doc.
We really are. We did not expect to do 11 pages today, but we did.
Again, we don't understand the assignment. We don't.
We never do.
We never do.
Except when it's Bebo's book report, then we always get A's.
True. That's the only class that I do well in.
Yeah, me too. I've really been slacking lately.
Yeah.
So
we try. Well, all things considered, we're going to be talking about that in just a moment here. So we'll again go through a short non-spoiler section to give you our overall impressions of the book, and then we're going to go full spoilers. But before we get into that, let's talk about our May 4th. Did it live up to your expectations? Because I was a little, iffy. I was a little waiting on my phone. You had me waiting by the phone all day, notifications on, and nothing came. Yeah. I mean, the good news is we did get the first episode of Bad Batch, and we did record our episode about it, and it was 75 minutes long. There were lots of surprises and fun little tidbits to talk about. So that was fun and exciting and good, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. At the same time, that was a bit of a confusing May the 4th, if you ask me, because I felt like there was a little bit of a lack of energy from the capital B brand about the Star Wars Day. Mm-hmm.
I was really hoping for a crumb, and I really do mean a crumb. Like, give me like a photo of a director's chair that says, Obi-Wan Kenobi on the back, and in video, like, in their production spot, not even on set. Nobody's sitting in the chair. Just give me the chair back, and I would have been dead. I would have died. I would have been like, oh my God, Ewan McGregor sits in that chair, you know. But we did not get really anything, and we had to find our crumbs on places we will not talk about on this podcast, aka Star Wars Leaks Reddit. So well, something not on Star Wars Leaks Reddit. I mean, this is on somebody's official Instagram, but Moses Ingram, who's in the Kenobi series, she did post a video to her story, which, I mean, I don't really consider this a spoiler if she's posting it. Proceed with caution. But she posted a video of her training with a lightsaber. So she was doing the move, the move from the Mustafar battle when they're just like spinning their lightsabers at each other. Yeah.
So she really had that down pat. And, we talked about during the news of the cast reveal how she posted, I play with lightsabers. She ain't messing around. She is playing with lightsaber, or a lightsaber. Mm-hmm. So it's to be determined if she adds another one in there. Maybe she's a dual threat, but I thought that was pretty cool to see her playing with lightsabers. And yes, like we said, there are some leaked photos going around, I will just say, of the Andor set. So if you want to be wary of that, know what is being leaked right now so you can mute as necessary. So proceed with caution there as well. Yeah,
I will say the crumbs there were fulfilling for my,
nice.
my heart, my Diego Luna-sized heart. But
yes.
Yeah, I think that Moses Ingram's really impressive Instagram video was cool, and also has me so curious about what kind of character. I mean, obviously some sort of lightsaber wielding character, but who's she going to be playing?
Yeah,
I'm
you think
so
light
curious
side,
about
dark side?
I have no idea, not a single clue. And what's really interesting about it is how is she going to come into contact with Kenobi? I don't know. I'm curious to find out. So there's that. I say the other piece of news is that we have the Galactic Star Cruiser officially opening in 2022, and then we got that teeny little reveal with the quote-unquote real lightsaber. What did you think about that?
It still looks really cool, and I would totally buy one. Keep it on myself at all times, just for protection. Hey, don't mess with me, and then have the lightsaber out. They would be scared.
There you go.
I will say that was pretty cool. The Star Cruiser I'm pretty excited about, although I don't know affordability-wise if I will be going anytime soon. but I would, maybe try to go if I can at some point, because I think that immersive experience of being on a starship and having the space outside the windows like is definitely worth your dollar if that's what you're trying to get. I think if you're able to afford that and you can kind of do the whole Batu Star Cruiser experience in one go, that would be pretty cool. I would imagine.
I feel like it's one of those things that it's going to be like, okay, 3 of my closest friends, we're going to pool our money. Who's getting the bunk beds?
Right.
to put 4 people in that room to make the cost, as cheap as it can potentially get, which is still thousands of dollars. And it really sucks that it's so cost prohibitive. But I mean, all of Disney is kind of cost prohibitive at this point, where it's upwards of $200 to get in for a single day, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But I hope to go one day. I have my hopes, my sights set on it eventually, so that'd be really cool. And that lightsaber, it broke my brain a little bit because we're so used to seeing perfectly done effects lightsabers in the movies. So seeing the Rey in the video turn on that lightsaber, I'm like, well, yeah, that's what happens in the movies. But then I have to like consciously think to myself, this is not an effect. This is actually
this
happening.
Is real.
And it's confusing. And so I think it'll be one of those things that once we see in real life, that'll be like the brain blowing. Everybody's going to spontaneously combust when they see it IRL, because then it's going to truly not be an effect.
Overall, though, with May the 4th, again, I ended the day feeling a little bummed, just because, again, I think for your official Star Wars Day, there should be some sort of news. I know last year we had the Leslie Headland Taika announcement. The year before that, we had all of the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker books. I don't remember the years before that as well, just because I wasn't in the fandom at that point. Hopefully we'll get something sooner rather than later, especially with all the High Republic stuff coming up. So books continue to be the best part of Star Wars at this given moment, although the Bad Batch is looking pretty great so far. So I'm excited to talk more about that.
Me too. But not on this episode.
So with that being said, again, not much news to talk about. So we're going to move on to our last piece here that we're going to start doing something a little different here on our book reviews. Sarah, did you want to tell our listeners what we're doing today and maybe moving forward?
All right. So I pitched the idea to Brad. I was like, Brad, we both love independent bookstores. We have our favorites. Why don't we, every time we do a book review, highlight a favorite independent bookstore of ours, talk a little bit about it, tell people what makes it special. And so Brad is going to kick it off today with his favorite independent bookstore. And hopefully, we'll continue to do this as we do book reviews. There are so many independent bookstores throughout the US and beyond. And I hope that you can find a new one that you haven't found before, or get to see us talking about your favorite bookstore. So if you have a favorite bookstore, tweet at us. Please. I'm very serious. Please tell us about your favorite bookstore, because I think I can also speak for Brad. We love to see it.
Yeah.
So
we would love to feature an independent bookstore in each episode and just talk about them. This isn't like an ad or anything like that. We're not getting paid to talk about these stores, but it's important now more than ever, with especially the COVID pandemic. A lot of small businesses are hurting, and Amazon does not need your dollar. Like, they are not hurting for money right now by any means. There are people who work in these bookstores who throughout the pandemic have been closed to customers, but they've still been in there shipping out books left and right, getting them out to their customers. I know that the store I'm about to talk about was doing that throughout the entire year pretty much. And they've worked really hard, and people have supported them to keep them in business. These are the types of businesses that if we lose bookstores, that would be a huge tragedy. I can't imagine a world where I can't walk into somewhere and look at books on a shelf. Like
the smell of a bookstore.
Yeah, there are very few stores that still you can get that experience with. So again, support local bookstores. Their prices are sold at actual retail value, unlike Amazon, which marks down their prices. So you're going to be paying a little bit more, but again, you are supporting a business. You are supporting people who have put their entire livelihood into a business and who need that income to survive. So I would like to shout out my favorite independent bookstore, which is Literati Bookstore in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So if you go on their website, they have a really wonderful website. They have some merch. They got a really cool a mug. They have a nice book you can buy. They have been around since 2013. They have a little nice cafe upstairs. You can order books online. I think the shipping is only about $3, so you're really not even paying that much for shipping. It's like $3 or $4. Definitely worth your while there. They get the books to you quick. They pack them really nicely through their shipper, and it's really, really awesome. And the best part about Literati is they have a typewriter in their basement. So when you walk into the store, you go down the stairs immediately to your left. There is a typewriter there, and you can just walk up to the typewriter and you can start typing on it. There's a blank sheet always in the typewriter. You just put whatever you want on there. And they made an entire book called Notes from a Public Typewriter, which basically they took all of the different sheets over the last 8 years, and they put them in this book. And you have tales from people who are sad, people who are celebrating a graduation, people who needed a friend, people who were going through it, people who were happy. There's all sorts of things in there, and it captures all these different memories throughout the bookstore's history. So I think it's really cool. But again, a really great bookstore, easy to navigate website, and also the staff there is really awesome. They're really nice. So
yeah, and I will say on their website, it's literatibookstore.com. If you go to staff picks, you can, which I thought was awesome, you can see each staff member's name and click on their name and see all of their picks. So if you can find a staff member who you vibe with, and then read all the books that they recommend, which I think is the best part of indie bookstores, is getting to know the booksellers and getting a personalized recommendation.
Mm-hmm. And they were the 2019 Indie Bookstore of the Year, so they are pretty well known in the indie bookstore community. They're pretty renowned, so definitely go support them if you can. And again, as we move forward, we will highlight other local bookstores who need your support, and they're a great place to get all your Star Wars books from. So again, give them your $1. Don't give them to a large corporation that doesn't need your $1. So that's my opinion for today, Sarah.
Yep. I second it. Thank you for telling us all about Literati. I did not know about the typewriter, so that's super cool.
Yeah.
I want to go visit and write on the typewriter.
Very, very wholesome. If you ever get to visit Literati, make sure you get on that typewriter and type something, because it's a wonderful feeling to feel those keys clicking under your fingers. It's great.
Grand Admiral Thrawn believes the rebels intend to raid the plant and steal fighters for their fleet.
Every ship they add to their arsenal increases the threat to our own armada and the Emperor's plans.
I trust you have a solution.
I will start my operations here and pull the rebels apart piece by piece. They'll be the architects of their own destruction.
So that wraps up our first segment of the show here. So we are now going to move into Thrawn Ascendancy Greater Good by Timothy Zahn. So this came out on April 27th. Right up top here, we're going to talk spoiler-free stuff. We're going to give you our initial impressions of the book and how it compared to the first book in the trilogy. Again, this is part of a 3-book trilogy that's happening. Chaos Rising was the first book in the series, which came out last year. So Lesser Evil is coming out later in November. I want to hear your initial thoughts, Sarah. What did you think of Greater Good, and how did it compare for you against the first book?
Sure. So I first want to dive into the audiobook. I feel like if you're going to pick up this book, I would highly recommend the audiobook, because Mark Thompson's performance of Thrawn and every single other character is really, really top notch. So this is an audiobook that's performed by Mark Thompson, of course, with Kevin Thompson, different Thompsons here, producing and directing. Nick Martell is the executive producer, and then Paul Goodrich and Justin Kilpatrick did post-production and sound mixing. And I will say that this team clearly vibes. They are rocking it out, because this audiobook is so well put together, and there's a lot of really interesting non-Star Wars music. And if you're a Star Wars audiobook listener, you might go, oh, I'm not quite sure about that. But because it's a conscious choice, and because they're kind of dealing with the beyond the chaos here, they're kind of adding different influences. And immediately right off the bat, at the end of the first chapter, there's like a really spooky music. And it really set the tone for this book, which I loved. As for the book itself, the content of the book, I did not like it as much as I liked the first book in the series, which I thought was quite strong, really surprised me, and turned me into a bit of a Thrawn fan.
Oh, it did. I was there for that.
Saying that. Yeah, you
that
were
was
there
a
for that.
roller coaster to watch you go. You went through it. With Thrawn.
I did. I really did. But for this one, I felt like the storyline got a bit muddied. I felt like Zahn really wanted to add a bunch of these plot lines in order for us to kind of lead to this really interconnected conclusion. But I felt that at times I didn't know where I was, nor the purpose of why exactly we were there. So we follow a lot of threads, and because we're following a lot of threads, there's a bit less Thrawn. And where's Thrawn in this book? I'm not entirely sure. So I echo that sentiment that I've seen others on who have reviewed this book already have said, and I definitely echo that. I don't know. My final thought is that having read this book and not having read Lesser Evil yet, I do feel like this had the potential to be a really strong duology, because a lot of this in the second book still feels like set up for book 3, which makes me hope that book 3 is a really hard hitter and it's just swinging out the gate, throwing punches the entire time. That's what I'm really hoping for. What did you think about your overall thoughts? And then we can kind of talk about how I compare it to the first specifically.
Yeah, I would say your last point there is exactly what my thought process is, because I think by the end of the book, I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And I could definitely see how Zahn is just using this book to set up what's going to be a home run, I hope. And is going to be something that really caps off this Chiss Ascendancy trilogy and gets us to the point where Thrawn is stranded and joins the Empire in the first book of the original Thrawn trilogy from a couple years ago. But yeah, this book was a little slow for me and got a bit confusing. That's not to say it doesn't have its great moments. I think there are a lot of interesting elements to this one, especially as it relates to the dynamics of the social hierarchies within the Chiss Ascendancy, and also some really cool new characters who we learn to love. I think Lakinda is a really interesting character. Arulani and Thrawn, their dynamic in particular, was something I really enjoyed in the first book, but we don't really get Arulani at all in this book. She's actually, I can't even think of many times I got to see her. And likewise with Thrawn, I think there's really just a couple times that he really stands out and is present. So I think that element was missing for me, and I have to still give kudos to Zahn, because he's being really ambitious with this one. This is unlike anything that we've really read before in Star Wars. It's much more sci-fi than it is really delving into some of the mysteries of the Force and all those sorts of things. Although there are Force elements in this, sort of, which we'll get to in our spoiler section, but it's not the focus. This is really something where Zahn is building a world and trying to give us the imagery for that and the understanding of it. But I think because he is so ambitious with it, and we are sort of reserved for just 3 books, a lot of stuff was just crammed into the middle book to set up that third book. And I think that's where, like you said, it got muddied and it got a little confusing. Although I think there are a lot of silver linings that I'm excited to see play out in the finale for this trilogy, which I'm hoping is just like awesome, jaw-dropping, incredible, sweeping moment of possible loss for the Chiss Ascendancy. You know, almost a tragic ending of sorts.
Yes, I think for the third book, though, I want really like all of the tactics to be up front. I never thought I would say that. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. More tactics is what Sarah is saying here. But for all of the Thrawn's tactical analysis to like really come together in the perfect jigsaw puzzle of the Chiss Ascendancy, right? And I hope that happens, but I feel like this book feels like the middle episodes in a season of a TV show. And I think we would be totally fine if these were the middle episodes in the TV show, but since we're getting this as a standalone book in the middle of this series and we have to wait a considerable amount of time, I mean, it's a handful of months, but still, that's a considerable amount of time for the third book. We just can't quite see the ending yet as it's being built up for us. But I think I love about the first book, as you mentioned, was Thrawn and Arulani, and how others see Thrawn, because I think that's what I missed and didn't quite understand about Thrawn in the other canon trilogy, is since we were in his point of view, we just got a lot of Thrawn himself, but everybody else sees him as a mentor, a trusted ally, a traitor, or a threat. And I just didn't see that because nobody was seeing Thrawn, because everybody was on their separate paths. So I'm hoping that all these threads really weave together in a great way. And I liked some of the character moments that were built for us on some of the secondary non-Thrawn characters here. And I'm just really excited to see that taken a step further for book 3. But I do wish we got more of it in book 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this book was a little less character focused for me. I think it was very heavy in the battle schematics and the tactics and the strategy and those sorts of things, which I think started to happen towards the latter parts of the previous Thrawn trilogy, which I didn't like those aspects as much, but like Chaos Rising was just really great in bringing me those character moments. And yes, seeing how Thalias views Thrawn, or seeing how Aralani views Thrawn, or even Sherry, and that was all great. But yeah, that was absent from this book for me, because I don't necessarily need the battles to be described to me in such a detailed way. I just want conversations between characters. There's a couple of conversations that happened in this book, which I'm very excited to talk about. Like more of that. There's one instance between Samacro and Thalias that's just like a really good conversation, and it's just amazing. I had to like put the book down because I was just so excited about it. So just more of that. If I can get that for a full 400 pages, put all the battle stuff aside, the terminology, the plasma spheres. I feel like I read the word plasma spheres so many times.
The laser bolts versus the plasma spheres versus like the breachers or something.
The breachers, yeah.
Something other version.
I just think of like the breachers. I think of like as like, the Nickelodeon slime, but like electrified or something, and they just like shoot slime out of their ventral cannons. I don't know.
Yeah. I will say that I think your point of making this, saying that this is a bit more sci-fi, is really apt. And it's also apt in the audiobook with the different music. So to give listeners who might be listening to this spoiler-free section only just a little bit of a very vague outline of this book. If you've read the first one, we pick up right where we left off in the first book, with all of the consequences that happened there. And we come across the new villain that was introduced at the end of the first book a little bit, and see how those dynamics are forming in order for him to win, I guess, in order for him to attempt to win and beat the Chiss Ascendancy at their own game. And at the same time, we're getting new allies like Lakinda, who we mentioned before. Yep. And we're also really trying to understand the family dynamics. Who is in the 9 ruling families? Who's in the 40, like lesser, but still right next to the 9 ruling families? I forget what they're called. But the 40 great families. And how are they vying for power and attempting to hold power? And what lengths will they go to achieve power, I think is something that we really see in this book. So I feel like that's about as much as I can tell you without getting into any sort of spoiler territory.
Yeah, that's a great description of it. Honestly, I would see this book more as a political thriller even. I would say this is definitely not a book you can just jump right into if you haven't read Chaos Rising. As Sarah says, we start right where we left off. So this, compared to the first trilogy, I think you could kind of jump into alliances or maybe jump into treason and sort of pick up the general gist of the book. Mm-hmm. But this is one of those books that is so separate from everything you see in the other trilogy, which is more about the Empire. This will really confuse you if you haven't read the first book. So make sure to read the first book first.
Yeah, this book doesn't quite give you as much of the, here's what happened in book 1. Kind of exposition-y point. It kind of just hops right in, which works, I think, especially ultimately when all the books are going to come out. If you read them all in one go, I think they're going to match up perfectly and be really strong in that way. But you don't get the same this or last week on Glee kind of recap. So
right,
yes, they're really interconnected in that way, which again, I think if we revisit it once all the books are out, will work to its advantage in a major way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's as much as we can say, really, before we move into the spoiler territory of the book. So again, if you haven't read Greater Good, I would turn back now, because if that's something you want to read on your own, this is not the place for you, because we are going to go full spoilers, talk about everything that happened, and we want you to experience that for yourself if that's what you choose. So again, last warning, spoilers ahead. Do not pass go. Okay, spoiler alert. Thrawn is still a daddy, Sarah. For the few times he does show up, he's a daddy.
That's true. That's true.
You know, he wins. He wins whenever people think he's not going to win. He somehow comes up with a strategy. He always sees the bigger picture. He always sees the pieces, even when people think the pieces aren't there. His mind works in some crazy, crazy ways.
I'm gonna go off of our notes here, but that time when he didn't get it, there was a time in this book when he was not on top of it, and somebody else had to guide him there. And I'm just gonna start right there. What did you think of that moment where he had to be guided by Lakinda to realize the error in his plan at the very end?
So you're talking about when Lakinda points out the fact that we are going to come out of this and have to have an explanation for it.
Well, we're going to come out of it and have to have an explanation for it, but we're also you don't realize that if nobody wins here, everybody's going to be wildly embarrassed and is still going to have an issue with power in this territory.
Yeah.
So Thrawn is not entirely on top of it as he was in the first book.
It's interesting because, I think one of the criticisms I would have about most of these Thrawn books is we don't often see him fail. Mm-hmm. I think the consequences of him missing that aspect of things that Lakinda notices could have been dire for all those families, like you said. But I would also like to see him continue to fail, because I think sometimes I don't like how perfect Thrawn is written. I don't like how he can just weasel his way out of like literally everything. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's maybe the Thurfian in me. You know, I would love to see him maybe in book 3. Maybe we see the ramifications of this mission and he thinks, oh my God, how did I not think of that initially? This could have been really bad if Lakinda hadn't noticed that. But now we know Lakinda at the end is being brought in as a natural born or trial born to the Arizi family.
Yeah, potentially.
Who are the rivals of the Myth family, right? So if you think of Lakinda sort of adding that knowledge to Thrawn where those gaps might be, if she's on the other side of the war for the civil war of the Chiss Ascendancy that we think might be coming, that Jixtus might be brewing up, what's going to happen when he doesn't have that input from Lakinda because she's on the opposite side, you know? So it'll be interesting to see. Maybe that's where, again, he fails. Maybe this is a little bit of foreshadowing to say, hey, Thrawn, you missed something. I'm going to teach you something. But later on, she's not going to owe that as much to him. She's just going to keep quiet because it means his loss, and it means the Arizi family gets elevated, and that's where we find him in the first Thrawn book of the previous trilogy. You know, he's literally cast out because of a grave mistake. Just a thought.
I can't believe you just did that. You just... I was not expecting. I mean, I don't mean this in a bad way, but I was not expecting.
I have my moments, not many of them.
Insight right at the top of the spoiler discussion. Wow. Okay, I hadn't considered this, and maybe it's because I'm stupid, but wow. I guess that makes a lot of ramifications.
Perhaps.
Indeed.
Perhaps.
Has a lot of ramifications for the third book when she recognizes already what his weakness is and what his flaw is. And when she's not on his side to tell him, who will also see that that's his flaw and aid him in that way. And, you know, maybe Aralani, but maybe she has the same flaw. And I'm really kind of mind blown right now. Now you're giving me dynamics that I didn't even think of for the third book. Wow. Okay. I did want to mention that you talked about failure and the potential for failure and Thrawn in this series. And I just want to go back to the first book. And I don't have this off the top of my head. I promise, guys, I'm not remembering random Thrawn quotes. But when Thalius is talking to the Patriarch in the first book, the Patriarch says, failure can be a harsh but capable teacher. And Thalius says, but only when those who observe it learn from it. So failures can be ignored.
Oh, we did talk about this in our review.
We did. We had a good conversation about this, but failures
Yeah.
can be ignored if they choose not to listen to them, if they choose not to look at them. So I guess the question is, will Thrawn see that moment where he had to be told something by Lakinda as a failure? Will he learn from that? Will Thurfian learn from the way that everybody came around Thrawn at the end of the book and everybody supported his story? Who will be learning from the failure here? And who will have to learn the lesson, I guess is the question, in order to get to achieve their objective.
Right. There
Mhm.
is a moment too where Thalius does tell Thrawn about that conversation with the Patriarch. And she hesitates initially. This is on page 324. She hesitates because she goes, this is something I was supposed to keep strictly to myself, but maybe if I don't tell him, this could be to his detriment. So she tells him that I'm supposed to look after you according to the Patriarch. And Thrawn says, I was unaware I needed looking after. And Thalius replies, everyone needs some looking after. He mostly wanted me to run interference for you as best as I could against your enemies. And Thrawn says, I assume lasers, breachers, and plasma spheres were my primary tools against such people. And Thalius says, you know what I mean, your political enemies. And this goes later on to something that Samacro says to, I believe it's Thalius. He says, Senior Captain Thrawn never plays politics because he doesn't know how to play politics. It's always strictly military, right? So, and we know from the previous Thrawn trilogy, his biggest weakness is politics. It's why when he joins the Empire, his military strategy is not necessarily the thing that's going to elevate him, and his lack of political knowledge is the thing that is holding him back. Relating that political idea here, Lakinda is pointing out something that is political. This is going to blow back on every one of our families if we don't think about those political ramifications. Could this mean the myth lose their status? Could this mean all these other 3 families lose their status? What's going to happen if we don't come up with an excuse for this event that we are participating in, right? I think that's foreshadowing when you have all of these players now rising in the ranks politically. You have Thurfian, who is the new Patriarch. You have Lakinda joining the Arizi. So I think overall a shitstorm is brewing for Thrawn very, very quickly. And I think it's all going to come to a head in book 3. And politics is going to be the thing that brings him down because he's just not there.
Yeah. I think the positioning of Thurfian as the Patriarch and Lakinda as changing her alliances is really going to shift the politics, on top of the fact that all of these lesser families in the 40 great families are going to be, like tit for tat, one after another, kind of going after each other. So I think politics specifically, and not necessarily the outside threat of Jixtus, is going to be the main driver of, 1, the plot, and 2, a failure for Thrawn.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about the families for a minute here.
Sure.
The Zodlak are a big player in this book that are introduced. We have Lakinda, who is a part of the Zodlaks. We have Lakuviv, who is what position is he again?
Counselor Lakuviv. I believe he is the, not a patriel. No, he's a counselor. So he's like a local, regional kind of a guy.
He basically takes Lakuni hostage towards the end of the book and uses her authorization codes to call a family emergency meeting. He doesn't necessarily go about it the right way, but I think Lakinda, when we talk about the Zodlak, their primary mission is they used to be one of the ruling families. A really interesting thing that we find out in this book that, there are the 9 ruling families, then there are the 40 great families, then there are also thousands of families outside of that who are all a part of the Chiss Ascendancy, and they're typically vying for local power. And typically those are the families that don't have any sort of connections to the inner circles, so they just kind of stay out on the fringes. The kind of interesting thing is when you're not part of the ruling families, and maybe you once were, you lose all of your warships, you lose all of your manpower, those ships get decommissioned, and they're just kind of sitting in a ship graveyard. 50 years ago, the Zodlak were part of the 10 ruling families, and those numbers haven't always been fixed. Sometimes there's been as many as 12, sometimes as few as 3. And according to Yopanek's studies, he says there might have only been 1 at the dawn of the Ascendancy. So what did you think of this whole dynamic of the 40 great families who are on the fringes, the secondary families, now being thrown into the mix? And does that spell doom for the myth? Could the Zodlak take over for the myth, maybe?
I think Yoponek saying that there was only perhaps one at the beginning of the Ascendancy is actually quite doomsday foreshadowing here, that the whole Ascendancy might fall apart a little bit here. But I really think it's interesting, right, that there have sometimes been 12, as few as 3, which means at some points, instead of perhaps switching out, let's say you have a lineup of 10 people and you just make one of them take a step back. Nobody replaces them. Nobody fills that spot. Now there's just one less person. And I imagine the Zodlak don't love that feeling. I've been in that sort of situation before where something was a fixed size at one point and then they just decided to make it less people, and then you're not involved anymore because you're the less person, right?
Yeah, we've all been there.
It sucks.
It's like getting benched in a sport. Yeah.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. I imagine the Zodlak don't love that feeling, especially when it's as fresh as 50 years ago, which is, a long time, but also within many people's lifetimes. There are people that remember, the members of the Zodlak family that remember being a member of the ruling family as a Zodlak. So I would imagine that there's a lot of bitterness there, and the quest for power is very on the tip of their tongue. We're just out of reach, So I found that to be really interesting, and to learn that there were 40 families circling this 9 was a lot to learn. It was very whoa, this is really complicated.
Yeah.
Because it really gives infinite permutations of the different dynamics. If, A family is not allies with B family, but allies with C and D family, and not allies with E family, you know what I'm saying? There's so many ways to put those combinations together to create chaos and turbulence or cohesion. So there's a lot going on there. And I hope that we kind of stick within the number of families that we've been talking about in this book. The Zodlak, the couple of other families that were mentioned as coming to this battle. And don't go too far into the weeds of the 40, because that could just get way too complicated. But I felt that it was really interesting that all of these families kind of have alliances with one another, and some of them don't get along, and how the ruling 9 use the 40 and how the 40 use their alliances with the 9 in order to navigate their circles of power.
I agree. It was really interesting. Probably the most interesting part of the book. I think once I quickly realized that this wasn't going to be the same sort of book as Chaos Rising, this was going to be more about the politics, the family hierarchies. I was like, okay, we're not getting what I thought, but that's okay. Let me hone in on this, because I think it is interesting. The idea that Thurfian realizes no matter what plan he comes up for Thrawn, he tries to say the Vigari pirates are working with the Patatus.
The Patatus, yeah.
But Zastalmu's like, look, your plan fell through the cracks. Like, you suck, and Thurfian's so enraged. But he realizes, let's use the Zodlak. Let's take Lakinda. She is a member of the Irizi family. And then we will use her skill set to then raise the status of the Irizi and maybe bring the Zodlak into play. And it's crazy to me that Thurfian will go as far as to hurt his own family. He is myth also, along with Thrawn.
Yeah.
So he hates Thrawn so much that he will sacrifice everything. He thinks Thrawn is a horrible person. He says he disobeyed standing orders in the first book. He endangered a Skywalker. He risked drawing the Ascendancy into what he quotes as a blatantly illegal and unethical war. Because we know that the Chiss Ascendancy is a very sort of not pacifist society. They're more like isolationists. They don't want to get involved, but they have the firepower to do so. But there's strict rules is that you don't act unless you are fired upon first. So I just think it is really interesting to see, like you said, like how they use the varying degrees of these families to influence one another. And try to gain power. And right now, this book was really setting up those pieces to say, okay, who's going to finally gain power in that final book? And you make a really interesting prediction that maybe it is just one family left, because already there are, 4 to 5 to maybe 6 families involved in this final battle that they're all lying about by the end,
Well, doesn't Jixtus at the end of the first book essentially say, they're like, his name is Jixtus. It's the name of he who will finally and completely destroy the Chiss Ascendancy. That's a quote from the first book. Maybe it'll happen, I think we expect to see our hero win at the end of their story, but maybe our hero won't win, and maybe Jixtus will come out on top.
I think that would be the best ending for this trilogy. Show us the ultimate loss for Thrawn. His
oh my god,
lowest
show us the
point.
ultimate. No, but show us the ultimate loss for Thurfian, because Thurfian sucks.
Yeah, I would not be sad if Thurfian was a casualty.
Show us the ultimate loss for Keelori of Uon Dalaran.
Sarah hates Keelori with a passion.
I hate him so much. I was so mad to learn that he survived this book. Oh, you have no idea.
Although it was really funny when he was talking to Jixtus and Haplif, and Keelori's like, if Thrawn gets involved in this operation, it's over, and not in a good way. Like, he is still so scared of Thrawn. He's just kind of like, he's like cowering in the corner. He's like, don't put me near that blue man ever again. His red eyes scare me. I'm terrified. I will shit myself if I see Thrawn.
Yeah, he's like, also Aralani and a couple of other guys, and I love how Hapleaf and Jixtus like know that he has this problem with everybody.
Yeah, and then Jixtus is like, I'll get Thrawn out of there. Just stop. Just don't worry about it.
I think you mentioned something really interesting. Like, this society is very, very isolated. And not only the isolated, you mentioned that they're reactive and not proactive. And I think that while Hapleaf's plan didn't really work in this one, as it had worked in societies previous, like in the Magus' world, Sunrise, I wonder if that isolationism and the reactionary nature of like their warfare is gonna end up biting them in the butt still. I think that door is still left open in book 3. Do you feel the same way about that?
Yeah, and I think this is a great transition to talk about the title of the book. Greater Good, right?
It has a title?
Yeah.
Sorry, my humor is so bad. Like, that's not even funny. Okay.
So, right when you open the book, it says, for those who recognize that the greater good, quote, is seldom good for all. Sarah, what is the greater good of the Chiss Ascendancy? How might that greater good seldom be the actual greater good for all?
Yeah, in this essay, I will. Please give me a good grade. I'm really anxious. You asked me a big question.
You're not graded here, and the points don't matter.
Yeah, that's the new theme of our podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it's the whose line is it anyway tagline.
Yep.
It's all made up and the points don't matter. I think that the greater good for the Chiss Ascendancy is the status quo of power. And those in power maintaining their power, not ruffling the feathers of everybody else, staying in their own little place and just minding their own business and their own politics and not worrying about anybody else. However, there's a lot to be learned when we share our knowledge, share our expertise, have conversations with, have a relationship with those that aren't in our immediate circles, those that aren't in our knowledge base, right? That's why, people have issues with whatever globalization. There are things that we've lost, but there's a lot that we've gained in terms of, things that we lost, I mean, like languages, right? But things that we've gained in terms of common knowledge and a greater understanding of other cultures, that sort of stuff. And so when we recognize that people see the greater good as the status quo of power, that ultimately hurts the marginalized, that hurts the people on the outsides, it hurts the people who are not in the in group, but are in the out group. And I think that means, in the Chiss Ascendancy, that means farmers like Lackfro, right? I think that means people in other worlds in the chaos who could use the aid of the Ascendancy on a regular basis. I think that means people within the 9 ruling families who don't have power, who aren't part of the patriarchy. I think it broadly still means women in the Chiss Ascendancy, and Skywalkers specifically. I don't know if they will get out of their power status quo to see the bigger picture of those on the margins. And that's what'll be interesting. And when I think about that, I specifically think of Thurfian, because now that he has the power of the patriarchy, he's in a position to make waves. So that'll be really interesting as we go into the 3rd book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting where we end up at the finale of this, where it says, quote, allies of the Arizi, Dasklo, and Plick all doing their damnedest to keep a Myth senior captain from testifying before the fleet and likely getting in trouble. A Myth officer, moreover, that many of them dislike to the point of hatred. Paradox, atop riddle, atop mystery. So they're really going out of their way here to protect somebody that they don't want to protect. And like you said, they are a very, very insular, selfish society that's looking out for the best interests of their own families rather than, I think, often the best interests of the Chiss. I think often they say, Chiss do come first, and that's kind of the larger theme of the final battle is, hey, Thrawn's ship is getting attacked. We have to come together as Chiss and forget our family first mentality or whatever. We have to really protect him and make sure he gets out of this alive. And it's almost interesting to see, from Lakinda's perspective, she says those are words that have always been whispered in her mind growing up, family first. It's what she's heard since childhood. It's what's colored to every thought and background to every decision. So it's almost this thing that's just taken hold of every Chiss, and it's going to be to the detriment of their society. And even in protecting Thrawn at the end, there's still that underlying root of hatred for him that they feel like they shouldn't be doing this. And I wonder if that resentment toward Thrawn, that they have to protect him for the safety of their own families and the status of their own families, if that's going to get in the way of decision making, and if it's going to just cause more problems and weaken them from the inside more than they realize, to where Jixtus can then come in and drive home the final spear into their livelihoods,
Definitely. I think there's a lot of potential for that.
Yeah. What did you think of that final battle, though? There was a great moment with Sherry, which I knew you were a great fan of.
Yeah.
And how did you just see all these pieces coming together? Did they fit together in the way that you expected? When was the light bulb moment? And just what did you think of that final battle?
So it all kind of came together for me once we figured out that the metal and the jewelry that was being made and given away by the Agbui, by Hapleaf, was not actually made by Hapleaf or the Agbui in general, but instead made by the Magus and her people on Sunrise. And I thought that there was a really interesting moment when Thrawn goes into Thalias's chambers, sees the clothing of the Magus in her hibernation chamber, and recognizes that those patterns on the clothing are similar to the patterns on the jewelry, and that it might not be at all what it seems. And so that was a really interesting way to tie so many of the threads together, because we were getting the Sunrise thread where Aralani was on Sunrise scouting for signs of life. It got us together with the Lakfro storyline, because Lakfro gave that jewelry to his cousin, who gave it to somebody in the military, who gave it to Lakinda, who gave it to, somebody who gave it to Thrawn. Maybe Samacro, who gave it to Thrawn. And it kind of brought together the Hapleaf part of this, and how he was manipulating the whole situation, and how Lakfro saw that, and how he is manipulating the society in order to break them apart. And I thought it was really clever to put it all together. And ultimately, this battle, I really enjoyed seeing, as you said, you hinted at it, Cheery as the hero. She doesn't have a ton to do in this book, but she comes in right at the end and reminds us of some of the stuff she did in the first book with Thrawn, and them flying around in that alliances kind of side chapter in the timeline here. And it was so awesome to see her use this force maneuver, tap into her third sight, her force, and do something different than what she had been doing as a Skywalker. And Thalia says, Cheery, I'm not sure this is a good idea. And she says, but it's sort of like what I do all the time. I see what the Springhawk might run into, and I change its direction so that it doesn't. I don't see a difference. That difference between the difference being between skywalking regularly and doing this, which is predicting something that isn't going to happen, right? And then making it happen anyway, is what Thales essentially says. And I thought that was such a clever way to expand upon a Skywalker's abilities, because we know what they're tapping into is the Force.
Right.
And there's this whole question about why the young girls lose their skywalking ability when it's just the Force. And I mean, that's still something we don't have an answer to, and I don't really expect us to get an answer to. But I loved that we get to see Cheery be a bit of a hero here and make sure that this maneuver makes it look real and makes the battle all come together in Thrawn's favor and in the maintaining of the status quo and the not starting a civil war, that favor. So yeah. I really liked that moment and thought it was really cool way to explore her abilities.
Yeah, and I'm still a little confused by the ending of the book. I know we crash the ship into a mine, although this all happens above sunrise, and we learn that, sunrise has kind of been where this has all been revolving around, but I will say the book wraps up rather quickly. It seems like a little bit anticlimactic of sorts, in a way that, the Magus is such an important character throughout the book, but we don't really get any sort of resolution to her story. Maybe we're supposed to be as muddled about it as maybe the larger council is going to be when trying to figure out the details of what's happening between all these families, and why isn't anybody telling us anything? But also maybe we'll just close this case and move on, because it's almost like all the families are ashamed that they even tried to do this and to go after this resource together, which is obviously the Nyx material, which is used for a lot of alloy metals and stuff, and it's such a rare resource in the Ascendancy that not a lot of people have access to. I think there was only 3 mines in the entire Ascendancy that were active.
Something like that.
I will say with the Haplift storyline, I was actually really interested, to see it all come together at the end and see what exactly we were leading to and what his whole larger motive was. Obviously, it didn't work in his favor, and he's killed. He's killed by Lackfro.
Good for Lackfro. Good for him.
Jixtus is in that mentality of, we don't blame people. We blame other people for our mistakes, not ourselves. And going back to the idea of, do we recognize failure? And maybe Jixtus is a character that doesn't recognize and learn from his own failure, because he puts it on other people who are either dead or captured or whatever, So it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top, Thrawn or Jixtus. But I will say with the Haplift storyline, I think it was ordered a little strangely. It was kind of weird to be getting present day Haplift and then all of a sudden going back in time and getting past Haplift in between all of the Lakinda stuff and the Thurfian stuff, and it was just all kind of mixed around. So I will admit I was losing track a little bit of all the names, especially since they're all very similar in their sound and their spelling. So that became a little hard for me to track, but I did like it. I will say Haplift is a total asshole.
Terrible person.
Yomi deserved better, by the way.
Oh my God.
The fact that he just ejected her from the ship and was just yeah, your wife left to go watch birds. And no, she didn't. I was actually shocked. I dropped my mouth open. I was audible gasp when she died.
Yeah, that was terrible. That was terrible. It made me really mad.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Didn't like that at all. I will say, I found the Haplift stuff interesting, even if times a little slow, but I followed it a bit easier than the Lakinda stuff because it was really grounded. Both storylines were quite grounded. I felt like there was a clear point A to point Z going on with both the Yoponek and Yomi storyline and with the Lackfro storyline. and with the Lackfro rancher farmer kind of storyline. But I was confused about why we were getting both of them when either of them gave us more or less the same information about Hapleaf and who he was and what sort of things he did.
Right.
To do. You know, like I felt like we were getting one story, but just kind of told choppily through the memories portion. But I didn't feel like it was giving me the insights into his character that I expected from the memories section, if that makes sense.
I think for me, what would have worked best is maybe give us a Hapleaf prologue, like a fairly decently sized prologue about his first meeting with Yopanek and Yomi. I think we could have filled in the rest of the pieces without doing what seemed to be double the work, you know? Like you said, like kind of re-explaining some of the things that we were learning anyways. So I think that was my problem with it. But I did actually find it interesting. I think Yomi's a really cool character. They speak so ill of her, and they say some horrible things about her, like some rather like sexist comments especially.
Oh my god, I was so mad. Hapleaf.
So it's an interesting choice to write those characters that way, but I think that's supposed to sort of give you that visceral, hateful reaction towards them. And like, God, I don't like these. Like, just how you don't like Kilori, I don't like Hapleaf. Like, I just have that like bile build up in my throat, and I just like want to vomit because I hate him so much.
Yeah, I will say though, I think that this storyline was giving me the most of what I enjoyed from the first book, which was the interpersonal relationships between the characters. Like we were really getting to know how Yopanek and Hapleaf interacted with one another and how dumb Yopanek was and how he just didn't question anything. And at the same time, we're getting this kind of layered storyline, layered relationship dynamic between Lackfro and his daughter and wife, and then with Shimkeef and Frosef. So I think there was a lot of conversations that were happening in this particular storyline than we weren't quite getting in some of the Chiss Expansionary Defense Fleet storylines because they were focusing on the military aspects of things for a lot of this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump over to a different storyline. We're going to talk about the Magus. So the big ethical dilemma of this book is she feels that Sunrise is lost and she wants to basically tell her people that we are going to touch the beyond. We are going to bring healing to our world for future inhabitants who will then, you know, take over what's left behind. And sort of that like circle of life idea. And obviously the beyond is another name for the Force, which I know you love all of your different,
I do.
You know, different things for the Force. You have the tide, you have all these sorts of different ways to describe
everything
it.
in the High Republic. I mean, yes.
Yeah. There's this idea of, you know, is the planet ever really destroyed, or are there still people thriving there who could rebuild without having to die off? And Thalius gives that story about how her world was destroyed because of the sun, and its output had changed, dropped temperatures, and the entire surface froze over, which we see that in the first book when she goes to visit the Patriarch, how they all live underground. And from above, you might not think there's a lot of people that live there, but underneath in the caverns, there's 8 billion people. So you would think that this planet isn't surviving, but it's very lively, and they've found a way to adapt. But what did you think first of the Magus to be the one to make that choice for her people, to determine whether or not their entire civilization died off? And then what do you think of Thrawn's choice to then strip that ability away from her, put her in a hibernation chamber, and wait to figure out, is there a different way to look at this and to prove that there is still some good in that world on Sunrise that she can reclaim and rebuild from, and it doesn't have to end like this?
Yeah, so I first want to touch on right when we meet the Magus, and she doesn't want to talk to anybody except for Thalius, because she says that Thalius has seen the beyond, or she has touched it in the past. And I really loved that, because that's what connected the beyond with third sight with the Force. And I thought that was a really special way to do that.
Yeah.
And also brings Thalius into the fold in ways that, she continues to get pulled into the middle of this stuff when she is not really prepared to be. And I like that because I like to see her stepping up. She's pretty awesome. But in this, we see her talking to the Magus and explaining, or in the Magus explaining the beyond and what her people believe. And I think it is really indicative of the way that hope and hopelessness spread both like wildfire. And I think it is the negative aspect of it, the hopelessness, that spreads and sticks a lot easier than the idea of the positive, of hope, right? It's a lot easier to wallow in the negative.
Yeah.
And I think because the Magus feels this particular way about her society, everybody is right with her because she is the position of power. She's the leader. And it is sad that her personal feelings on the situation seemingly strip away the choice of her people. But it's also interesting how willing her people are to go along with her. There's clearly a devout belief in the beyond, in the understanding of their doctrine and of their and of their lifestyle. And I find it interesting when we learn that she ordered one of her people close to her to die, and he just kind of did. He didn't use any implements. He didn't, do anything normal. He just kind of laid down and died, essentially. That she became a lot more dangerous because she could essentially do it with her words and do it with her mind. And you didn't need anything special to die. While Thrawn's decision takes away her choice to make that choice on behalf of her people, ultimately, he's working to save lives and to get more information. And I think I support that choice.
Mm-hmm. It is
I feel like that's kind of muddy, but yeah.
It's a very complex issue, I think. And even on page 180, Thalius thinks, quote, hadn't they taken the right of decision away from her by forcibly seating her and locking her into hibernation? From her point of view, hadn't they violated her rights? It was a troubling question, end quote. And even Sherry asks, when they're having the discussion and Sherry figures out what's happening, Sherry goes, well, what if they change their minds? So it's that kind of curiosity of the kid that then comes into play and then changes Thalius's perception of, what are we doing here? But also, what if they did change their minds? Is there a way to prevent this from happening? Because obviously you don't want to see the loss of life, like on this scale. And even Thrawn says that he wants to, resist any sort of needless death as much as he can because he thinks all lives are important. So it is a very complex question. Now, I don't know if putting her in hibernation was necessarily the right choice, but I think Thrawn should have definitely tried his best to prove to her that there is more to Sunrise than she might believe. But it is a tough question. Although I have to admit, again, not getting closure on her story, it's hard for me to see what was the impact of that choice, right? The last thing we see of her, she goes back to sleep in the hibernation chamber, and Thalius notices it's because that she apparently kind of took a sideways glance at Sherry, and she saw her there, and all of a sudden changed her mind of not wanting to go to sleep, and she goes, okay, yep, I'll do it, no questions asked. And it was kind of abrupt. I don't know what you made of that and her seeing Sherry. Like, what did that spark, you think, that made her want to abide by their demands? And also, like, do you feel like there was just any closure, and did that diminish sort of the impact of this character and the story and the subplot?
Yeah, I feel that it was kind of abrupt and that we didn't really get the closure on this one that I think we'll ultimately get in book 3. I think she's going to come back and play a role in book 3 to some effect. To what effect, I don't know, but she's going to come back. They're going to wake her back up, and, she's going to have something to say or something to do that's going to be really impactful for everyone. And I think it might have to do with, again, interpretations of the Force. And I think her seeing Cheery, because I don't believe she had seen Cheery before, recognizing that there was another person on that ship who had been touched by the beyond, who had seen the beyond, who had the third sight, the Force, that allowed her to see that there was a future, and the fact that she was a child. I don't know. I'm making stuff up, but it's working for me. And kind of going to a different moment before she makes the choice to go back into the bed. I'm kind of jumping here, but roll with it. When Thalius takes the piece of jewelry that he got from the person who got it from the person who got it from Lackfro's cousin who got it from Lackfro, right? And she essentially takes it from him and says, look, there is promise in this. You see this piece of jewelry, you recognize this. Well, it means that it's still happening, that something is still going on your world. Because does this look old? Does it look janky? No, it looks beautiful. It looks pristine. It looks brand new. It looks hand done, hand designed. And I thought that was a really powerful moment for Thalius, because Thrawn could not have delivered that level of empathy and that level of hope. I think he was there to get the information and not see the Magus as a person necessarily, but see her as a subject, a specimen. And Thalius really decided to see her as a person who needed this specific telling of the story in order to latch on and one, serve by giving them information, and two, by helping to influence her to stay alive and help keep her people alive. And so I think from that moment, that hope, that spark, right, from that conversation to seeing Cherie, who is this young child who clearly has the beyond or the Force or third sight, allowed for her to come to a resolution that now wasn't the moment. She needed to get more information. She still has a purpose here, and that maybe not all hope is lost on Sunrise.
I want to add to your point about Thalius, and I do think she really does shine in this book, and we do get a big focus on her in the absence of, a character like Aralani. There is a greater focus on her with being the sort of liaison between the Chiss and the Magus. And you talk about the idea of how Thalius sees her more as a person than like a tool. So I want to go to page 84, this is the conversation I talked about in our spoiler-free section that I was like really kind of just blown away by, and just definitely one of the standout moments for me. But this is when Thalius and Samacro are talking, and Samacro's already not super thrilled with Thalius at this point, because after she meets the Magus, Thrawn wants her to be recognized at a ranking that's higher than her usual ranking. So everybody on board has to call her like, commander or something, which is totally out of the norm. And Sir Macro is just so concerned. He's like, what the hell is happening with my life, with my fleet? I got demoted from the Springhawk to start. We almost lost our fleet to Yiv. Thrawn isn't just going over the edge. He's crossing it. And he doesn't want Thalius giving orders on the ship. And he hates politics. He hates feeling like there's some ulterior motive to Thalius. So Thalius talks about how she's realized that Cherie's sleep cycle, if it's synced up with her third sight, they get the best utilization out of her. And Samacro's confused why that isn't the norm. And she figures just because, it's easier to do it however they're already doing it. And Samacro says, quote, because it's easier? This is the expansionary defense fleet, caregiver. We don't do things just because they're easier. We do things because they work. The Skywalkers are the key to our entire mission statement. We need to protect that resource as much as we can. And Thalius says, you make it sound like she's just another plasma spear launcher. And he says, so? We're all resources here. That's how you have to think in the military. And she replies with thinly veiled sarcasm. Sorry. I always assumed we were real, live, socially valuable people.
My girl, Thalius.
Drop the mic.
Absolute winner.
Drop the mic.
I mean, she's right. She's right. She has a different point of view in this military operation than Samacro or anybody else, because she has the ability to see the members of the military, the people on that ship, as people, and her enemies as people. And the situations that she continues to get dragged into because she happens to be there, like with the Batatas or with the Magus, and empathize with them, see them as people, and ultimately be really useful because she's the one that has a complex view of the situation and has an empathetic view of the situation.
Yeah, and it's unique too because she's one of the first Skywalker turned caregivers in, at least 100 years. And not many people do that because a lot of Skywalkers want to step away and never return. So the fact that she has come back and has that perspective lends to her credibility as a caregiver, and why she understands things so differently and why she's sympathetic is because Skywalkers are growing up in an environment where they are very nurtured and they are literally cared for by a specific person, and they develop that relationship. So they have that foundation of understanding. And when they're growing up and being seen, they grew up to then see other people. So that's why Thalias has that. That's why I love Thalias. She's definitely one of my favorite characters of this trilogy.
Oh, 100%.
I hope she shines like a diamond in Lesser Evil, and I hope she doesn't die. Please don't kill her off.
Oh my
God. It will
God.
be so sad. But she's a great character.
I will write an angry letter. I won't send it, but I'll write it. All right. I do want to add that this conversation with Samacro saying, well, why haven't we been doing it this way? And you mentioned that Thalias is one of the first Skywalker turned caregivers in 100 years. And I think that nobody has a true understanding of the Skywalker because the caregivers were not Skywalkers themselves, don't have that expertise, grew up in a completely different environment. Whereas Thalias, I think, really has the ability to get down to the nitty gritty and understand why Cheery has the specific moods that she's in, or has the specific cycles that she's in, sleep and
what she needs to eat.
Sight. Yeah.
That gets talked about a lot. Nut paste sandwiches. We can't forget that from book 1.
Nut paste sandwiches, meat stripe chewables, something or other, like something really weird in this one.
I think her star day happens in this book, which is her birthday. Isn't that a thing at one point? She has her star day.
Yeah. But I just think it's because nobody's listening to the caregivers, and especially nobody's listening to the Skywalkers. They're just being shuffled around. They're the youngest person. They're a young girl on top of that, not only their age, but their gender. So I think there's a lot of levels there that keep them apart from the infrastructure and the mind of the military. And they're choosing not to understand the Skywalkers, whereas Thalias is choosing to make that a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see where her character goes. We said this in our first review. Again, if you haven't listened to our Chaos Rising review from last year, you should definitely go do so. But I think we talked a lot about how we wanted to see more from Thalias, so I'm really happy that she wasn't put on the back burner in this book, and she did still play a pretty prominent role, because I think she's going places, and I'm excited to see where that might end up. I mean, she went through those trials. Did she actually finish them in the first book, or did she get close to finishing them? I think she became a trial born, right? I don't
remember.
I'm losing track of everything. It's been so long, but I think she's a really compelling character. I will be interested to see how she reacts to the news of the patriarch dying, because we didn't get to see that in this book.
Oh, yeah.
But I would be curious to see, now that patriarch is dead and Thurfian has moved into his position, what does that mean for Thalias's role in protecting Thrawn in book 3? I think that's going to be even more important than ever. Shit's going to get real in book 3, I feel like. I really hope it lives up to the hype, because I think it has the ability to do something incredible, like amazing.
Wasn't Thurfian the one who initially was like, you're going to spy on Thrawn for me? Was that him?
I have Chaos Rising right here. So this is from chapter 2 of Chaos Rising.
Cool.
Thalias is trying to get on the ship, and the gentleman says, request denied. And she goes, what do you mean denied? I have the data work right here. And so they kind of get into this little bit of an argument here, and who comes along? None other than Thurfian.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so the dynamic is even crazier then, because Thurfian is now the patriarch and the one who is like, put her on the ship.
Yeah, because
and also tell me information. But she's like not telling him information, but now he's the patriarch.
Yeah. It says here, I understand the young lady is trying to secure a place aboard the Spring Hop, and he says, oh shit. So This is crazy. Thurfian has been plotting this since day one. This is insane.
Yes.
It's insane going back to look at this chapter. The guy who won't let her on the ship says, the paperwork isn't in order. It's not that easy. And Thurfian says, of course it is. And then the guy says the approvals haven't been completed. And Thurfian says, I'm completing them now. So yeah, he basically goes on to, I believe, have her spy on Thrawn. And it's amazing when you think of Samakro's loyalty to Thrawn and his desire to want to obey Thrawn's orders. He recognizes that Thrawn has a lot of flaws and goes to many extremes, but he also realizes that he's an excellent commander. He knows how to handle his ship. Even when his outrageous hunches are proven correct, he always brings everybody through the storm no matter what. Always. That's on page 401. So we know that Samakro is suspicious of Thalius, but he's not recognizing who's actually pulling the strings, which is Thurfian. Are people suspicious of Thurfian at this point? That's the sort of question. And are people connecting those dots, right? So it remains to be seen how that all plays out in book 3, which let's now transition to what's next. What's going to be happening? But I want to go back to your point about the Magus and how she looked at Cheery. And I want to connect that now to Jixtus.
Okay.
So Jixtus, he's kind of confused how the Chiss are traveling without navigators, without hiring navigators. He doesn't understand this. He says they either have their own hidden world or, quote, it is said that a millennia ago the Chiss adventured into lesser space, taking part in wars between two hostile factions over vast and ever-shifting regions. Those factions reportedly had special navigational techniques that involved computers or mechanical constructs. Even now, those in that part of the galaxy use such techniques, end quote. I don't know if this is harkening back to the Old Republic or the High Republic and the idea of path engines, such as what Marchion Ro uses in Marie Santeca. I don't know if that's all connected there, but I want to say he's trying to figure out how do the Chiss travel. And guess what? Guess who knows that? Guess who saw the little girl? And guess who knows about the third sight through Thalius? The Magus. And guess who feels a little bit betrayed that her choice to decide for her people was taken away from her so abruptly? The Magus. She is not happy with Thrawn.
Oh my god.
She's not happy whatsoever. She says, how could you do this to me? How dare you deny me the right and weight of leadership? Do you betray me and my people with no guilt or consequence? That's on page 352 when she wakes up. So I think the Magus has a thirst for revenge. And I think she might give Jixtus the answer that he needs. And if we know that nobody knows about the Skywalkers outside of the Ascendancy, that might be the one weakness that Thrawn doesn't realize. He doesn't see that political ramifications of hibernating the Magus. He doesn't see that part. He just sees the military strategy. He doesn't understand the social implications of what he's done and the idea that the Magus could maybe turn against him and go to Jixtus. And he doesn't even know about Jixtus. He knows there is a larger player at work, probably behind, Yiv the Benevolent, but what do you think of all of that? Is that gonna bite him in the butt? This decision?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. You've completely convinced me it's gonna bite him in the butt.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
Absolutely.
So.
And we learn that Jixtus is a Grisk, who the Grisks are one of Thrawn's enemies in the previous trilogy throughout alliances and treason. So this is a big deal. We're forming that early arch nemesis, and it starts with Jixtus. He might not have such great memories of the Grisks, and that remains to be seen maybe why in book 3. So
yeah, okay, now I'm on Wikipedia on the Grisks, and everything is making sense now. Everything makes sense, because they're talking about how they're terrifying warriors. They were known to be like half of myth, who few had actually seen. Jixtus, right? He's very kind of wears the hood and whatever. They employed client species, which were beings that they had convinced to serve them. They would find their deepest fears and desires, as well as their most treasured hopes and memories. They could twist them all to their will, eventually enslaving the individual. Now, I read the first 2 books in the other Thrawn series a while ago and don't remember really anything about the Grisks. So this is my fault, but like, oh, everything makes so much sense right now.
Yeah.
I'm putting it all together on the podcast live.
So yeah, I mean, do you think this is really going to all come to a head in book 3 and Jixus is just going to kind of unleash all hell, especially once he finds out what the Skywalkers are and what they're capable of? And I don't know how he would use that to his advantage, honestly. I mean, maybe taking them out of the equation and forcing the Chiss to do jump by jump, which could leave them in a vulnerable spot. I don't know. I don't know how that works.
We're getting it to a conclusion that I just really don't want to consider.
I do want to add one other really terrifying layer to this this book 3. So when Lackfro is fighting Haplif,
yeah,
there is a moment where he mentions that he sent the brooch to his cousin on Naparar. And Haplif goes, Naparar? And then it's one of those moments in the film where you over-explain things and then, you know, somebody else is listening. And they're like, oh. And then Lackfro goes, yeah, that's the headquarters of the Expansionary Defense Fleet.
Oh, no. Oh my God. Oh, my God. But he dies.
Right. But guess what? That ship hasn't flown off yet. I think Shimkif is listening to that conversation.
Oh, no.
And we know that she links back up with
So they're going to go to Naparar.
Yeah, so if they draw all the attention away to the headquarters, if the headquarters gets attacked, does that leave the Skywalkers vulnerable?
It leaves the Skywalkers vulnerable, but it also leaves Chila vulnerable.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Boy.
I've been talking a lot here. There's a lot of theories floating in my head for, you know, what could go wrong? Everything. But what are your thoughts? You know, where we leave off, where we're going, what's going on?
You have put together all of the good theories for what's actually going to happen in book 3. And I'm going to listen back to this episode before we read book 3. And we're going to talk about what we were right and wrong about, because this is fascinating. And I am mind blown because I feel like it all could come together. And I think if they attack Naparar in the Chiss Expansionary Defense Fleet headquarters, that leaves Chila vulnerable, both in terms of warships and in terms of power, right?
Yep.
I hate to see it, but I think the Chiss are going down.
But the thing is, the Jixtus, does he have an army? Does he have armed forces?
Does he need an army?
That's the thing. I don't know if he would necessarily directly attack the capital with the Grisks, or would he? Or is he just trying to destroy them from the inside? Are the Chiss going to attack themselves? I don't know.
Well, I think that was the initial goal by using Hapleaf, but clearly that didn't work.
Yeah.
So I think they might need to use a strategy of both attacking from the inside and the outside. Really, like a really robust inside and outside kind of go at it in order to even get in.
Well,
and erode it.
Because book 1 was attack from the outside with Yiv. Book 2 is attack from the inside with Haplif. So yeah, I think you're right. Let's put 1 and 1 together.
Shut up.
Simultaneous destruction. You know, it makes sense when you think about it, you know?
Yeah, it does.
I mean, that's why this book was so focused on Haplif.
Damn it. Now I gotta go. Oh, my.
We're going to reread both these books, aren't we, before November?
Well, probably not, but I might reread all 3 of them after they come out.
Yeah. Like, see how they all come together.
What? I missed that. That was so important, and I didn't even know.
Oh, that's crazy. You know, let's continue on the thread of destroying from the inside. So Thurfian is where we truly end up with this book. So do you want to talk about where we leave off with the newest elected patriarch?
Oh, well, R.I.P. the patriarch from the first book, who had that wonderful conversation with Thalius. May he rest in peace. I do not remember his name, but I remember the conversations. So.
Honorary Golden Gorg for Patriarch of the Century.
Honorary Golden Gorg for Patriarch of the Century.
Yeah.
/ having a conversation that was very Star Wars at its heart. So anyway, Speaker Thyklo, who is a woman, and I will just mention that there's a lot more women in this book, and that there are women in positions of power throughout the patriarchy, which was essentially my problem with book 1. So I'm happy to see it.
Lots more women in this book for sure. Love it.
Happy to see it. All right.
Down with the patriarchy.
Still no parents really in this book. So no moms, but happy to just see women existing. So that's super cool. Anyway,
I'm telling you, Lakinda,
so
she's a dark horse. I love her. She's my new favorite, honestly.
But there's also Patria Lacuni, who is also a lady.
Yeah,
so
she's great too.
Shout out.
And anyways. Rest in peace, Yomi. Anyways.
Yo, rest in peace, Yomi. Oh my god.
Hashtag never forget.
Yomi deserved better. Speaker Thyclo offers Thurfian the position after Speaker Thyclo herself was offered the position, but she didn't want to start over and she wouldn't be able to handle it. So she passed over the Patriels, is where they would typically pull from, and hopped right over to Syndic Prime, now Patriarch Thurfian. And we learn right at the end of this book, we get saddled with a cliffhanger here because he has to be told about all of their history. And the book ends with, "And I will tell you of a terrible alien weapon known as the Star Flash." Now, friends listening to this right now, let's say it together. What is the Star Flash? On 1, 2, 3, the Death Star. Brad, you didn't join with me. I've been teaching preschoolers, Brad.
Oops.
1, 2, 3,
the Death Star.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm so glad we could do that. Yeah.
We did it. We did it.
Hooray. Okay, anyway.
Let's just make this a Dora the Explorer podcast.
We're pivoting, listeners.
Surprise.
Into Dora the Explorer. So get ready for our full show rewatch, episode by episode, where we will break it down. But anyway, we were
Friends
talking
of the
about
backpack.
Okay, we have to stop.
No, Friends of Boots.
Friends of Boots. So this ended with the Star Flash, which is another way to talk about the Death Star, I'm assuming. What did you think about this? What were your thoughts? Go.
Oh boy. Okay, so there's a lot to be discussed here. It could be the Death Star. I know that has floated around so far.
I mean, that's what I believe, clearly.
Which would make sense. Star Flash, you know. There is another piece of information that's mentioned in this book about old secret Chiss technology. So when Lackfro is initially trying to make sense of the brooch, he says that it could be maybe a treasure map that leads to some old tech that's been lost in the millennia since the Ascendancy retreated from lesser space. You know, some of the adventures that they had into lesser space. And then there are rumors of such pieces of alien technology buried in secret tombs and research labs that only patriarchs knew about.
Oh, but I feel like Star Flash has to be the Death Star, which like if it's the Death Star or Death Star technology, how perhaps are the 9 R'lyeh families interacting with lesser space? Is it some super secret thing?
Yeah, I don't know, but the fact that
Wayfinders, Sexagol. Yes, I said it.
Oh.
I don't know. I'm throwing things out there.
I find it interesting here that only patriarchs are the ones that knew about these rumors of these secret research labs. So obviously the book is going to end with the new patriarch and saying, hey, you're about to get your orientation, sit back, and let's tell you about Starflash. So I think it actually relates exactly to what Lackfro is saying here about how it is this old technology that when the Chiss were in lesser space a millennia ago, they were after some of the stuff, and when they retreated back into the Ascendancy, back into their isolationist ways, they didn't take this technology with them. It has been left behind in lesser space.
Oh, so you don't think it's the Death Star?
It could be, but I don't know timeline-wise if that matches up. Well, I just don't know. I don't know. It could, if it's the Death Star, it'd be very interesting to see how it's integrated.
I wanted to I checked on the timeline for all of us here at home.
Oh, thank you.
I got you. Thrawn Ascendancy, Chaos Rising, and Greater Good and Dark Disciple, a Clone Wars novel, are placed in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith.
Well, all right, so it's not out of the realm of possibilities.
No, it's not.
What
But it
if-
doesn't mean that other things like Wayfinders, Exegol, and those sort of technologies and locations are also not out of the running either.
But I guess what business would they have using the Death Star? Why would the Patriarchs need to know about such a weapon? I don't know. I guess we don't have the answer to that. It's curious.
Could we interpret Starflash as something like advanced, like hyper advanced hyperdrive engines?
Star Flash.
Or
like the Starlight Beacon. Starlight.
Or like,
It could be old Nile technology, you know? Old technology from the Old Republic.
oh,
Because I think it is, you know, if we're talking about a millennia ago,
that's a couple of years.
if this is if it's a technology lost a millennia ago, that dates back before the High Republic. Dang.
Oh no,
We're going far back. So that's why
we're in danger.
that's why I don't think it's a Death Star. I think we're gonna get. I hope we get some new
Well-
stuff. You know, that'd be kind of cool to get like a new piece of technology that only the Chiss knew about.
Wow, I'm gonna be so wrong. I'm gonna listen to how wrong I was in a couple months from now and go, she's so silly.
Or just watch it be
Silly
the Death
Sarah.
Star, and we'll just be sitting here going, somehow the Death Star has returned in November.
Yeah. but well, maybe I'm not talking about the Death Star specifically, but like the technology that makes
Kyber crystals.
the kyber crystals that create sort of that kind of explosion.
Yeah, because it does say
Or-
secret tombs, so could be old Jedi temples.
Starflash as in a lightsaber?
Hmm.
I don't know. Like, you know, because you're seeing a bright burst of light when the lightsaber ignites.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting, though, to see, given Thurfian's motives, we haven't had really a patriarch who's wanted to
Thurfian.
tear down their own family, I would imagine. So what is he going to do with that knowledge? You know, and that's what they don't realize, is that they're giving this knowledge of Starflash to somebody who is probably going to use that to tear down the Ascendancy. And then it goes back to Jixtus's plan, which while we were discussing, you know, the idea of how is Jixtus going to take down the Chiss, I forgot to write down this quote from him. But he says, defeat isn't always necessary. Isolation and neutralization can be equally effective. My more immediate concern is the fact that you left Haply's body behind for the Chiss to examine. You know, Keylori tries to take the blame off himself, but Jixtus says, nope, the blame is where it's deserved and only those who fail us. And Keylori just kind of abides to that. And he goes, you know, is everything over here? And Jixtus says, have you forgotten your owed mandate, Keylori? I told you to learn for me how exactly the Chiss navigate through the chaos. That is what I need you for, and that is the task you will accomplish. And he goes, yes, sir, I'll do my best. And Jixtus says, yes, you will, because as I said, we lay blame on those who fail us. So we were right. That's exactly what he's going to try to figure out. That's the missing piece of the puzzle is how do they travel through the chaos? And then now you integrate Starflash into the equation, and if Thurfian wants to take down Thrawn, if he gets any wind of Jixtus, do you think they could side together and literally take down the Chiss Ascendancy from the inside and the outside? And I don't know. Would
scared.
Thurfian turn his back on the Chiss is the question. Like the entire Chiss Ascendancy.
I'm having big, like, mom pick me up, I'm scared vibes
Yeah.
coming from this discussion and all of these theories that specifically the unmentionable thing I will not mention because it would make me mad. I treat my books very well, but if this thing that we're not talking about with regards to the elimination of the Skywalkers, that sort of thing, if Cheery becomes a pawn, I will throw a book. That's a threat. I'm not going to throw the book at anyone or anything. I'm just going to throw a book. There's a lot of theories that I think are really solid here.
Yeah.
Which just scares me.
Well, book 3 is called The Lesser Evil. Comes out on November 16th, so it's only a couple months away. Let's think about the phrase lesser evil. If you have two choices, both are bad, one is less bad. What do you think those two choices could be? What is the lesser evil?
It's Thurfian's point of view, and I think he's going to think Thrawn is the bigger evil.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
I'm full of nonsense tonight. You're full
no,
of
I'm
good
just
thoughts.
thinking.
I'm full of nonsense.
I don't know if I have an answer because I haven't thought about it too much.
With that, do we want to head into our speed run of all of our favorite cool tidbits from this book?
Yeah, we have a couple here left over. So I'll go first real quick here. This nice Last Jedi connection.
Heyo.
So Hapleaf, when he's visiting Jixtus, he thinks, quote, he didn't know what part of the chaos these so-called attendants came from. He'd never seen anyone like them except the pair of Jixtus's personal service, but they were clearly from someplace far away, and their purple robes and eerie eye lenses were as unsettling as their perpetual silence. Now, you may recognize these attendants. They are from The Last Jedi in Snoke's throne room. So the attendants are these big purple guys with the kind of Jawa eyes on the inside. They're white eyes inside of a dark hood. And yeah, they're from the unknown regions. So it makes me wonder if Jixtus is also from the unknown regions. And maybe Jixtus is Snoke, Sarah. Oh my god. We're going to light up the Snoke theories again. Let's do it. Let's do it right now. Our Snoke theories don't suck. They're great.
Here's the thing.
I'm just kidding.
I'd believe it.
I'd believe it at this point. Listen, Luke's hand is in a pickle jar. I mean, anything is possible at this point. Jixtus is Snoke. Yeah.
I just so dislike the clone Snoke thing, and I feel like it diminishes this awesome attendant connection in the slightest. Because it's really Palpatine who found the attendants. You'd think, right? Anyway, okay, I'm off of that. The attendants are cool. They're really weird.
Yeah.
But my interesting thing is Jixtus's chamber is like super sci-fi.
Yeah.
And you sit in the chair and they like conform to your body. And I just read a science fiction novel called Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. And essentially the same thing happened in some of their office meeting room spaces in space. And I was like, I love this. I wish I had perfect chairs that conform to my body. And so that I didn't have back pain while podcasting. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting.
Love it. I want to give a shout out to the March of Silence. It is a favorite spot for speakers, syndics, and others of the aristocrats made out on private and neutral ground. So I thought this was kind of cool. It seems like one of those scenes in the movie where like the two people are conspiring and they meet in the library and they're kind of like facing opposite directions with their backs against each other. And they're kind of like, speaking and they're like, trying not to be conspicuous. So I imagined that sort of scene between Thurfian and Zostalmu in the beginning. I was like, oh, you guys, you're trying to be subtle. It's not that subtle. Everyone knows what you're doing. They can see you, So I thought that was a kind of cool concept. And I love it's called the March of Silence. I almost think of a library and there's some librarian in there going, shh. they're trying to plot.
I imagine it as this like really tall, wide, big, think of like
Jedi library.
Well, Jedi library, but like think of like the size and scope of like Catholic churches in Rome.
Yeah.
With like the huge, long, big, tall, like every like large kind of descriptor.
Right.
They are maybe less ornate, but with that same spacing. But instead of being beautifully echoey, it's like the sound is dead.
Mm-hmm.
So you can stand in a corner and the sound doesn't echo. So people could just be standing everywhere. It could be very busy and nobody could overhear your conversation. That's my thought of this. But I have two more just really small ones. One that are conference calls. Canon.
Ooh.
You can't get away from them in the Star War. The conference call endures. Secondly, sky truck. Not a speeder, but a sky truck is what Lackfro takes Hapleaf to Counselor Lakuviv, I think, at one point. They drive them over there on the sky truck. Not fly, but drive, kind of a deal. I thought that was kind of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I love when you integrate things from our real world into Star Wars and then give them new names.
Conference call stays the same, though.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what a conference call is.
Yopanik goes on a wandering year, which is basically just the Chiss version of study abroad. So you love to see it. Love to see it.
Yeah, it's like the gap year. I'm taking a year to travel.
I just want a lot of knowledge and experiences. Yeah. I just want to go.
I'm backpacking.
I just want to go to France and eat a baguette, like straight from the bakery. Oh, now I want to go to France. Let's do Friends of the Force live from France. So we're going to do the Denny's thing next year.
Yeah.
Then we'll do our wandering year in France where we'll podcast exclusively from France for a week.
Are we gonna podcast in like little coffee shops and
yeah, instead of plugging like
shops?
Independent bookstores, we'll plug bakeries and like pastry shops.
This is a great idea.
Yeah. Okay.
11 out of 10 for the Friends of the Force.
Put it in the Google Doc.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Well, that about wraps it up for our review on Greater Good. So thank you all for joining us. Again, Lesser Evil comes out in November, so we will be back here right before Thanksgiving week reviewing this book.
Oh, boy.
So stay tuned to your podcast feed approximately around that time. It's crazy to think about. And last thing I will say is a quote here from Jixtus. I just feel like we got to end on a Jixtus quote. He says, "Beware of overconfidence. Eyes held high in pride are less able to see uneven ground ahead." And I think that is, there's a lot of uneven ground ahead in this trilogy, and I'm excited to see where it takes us. I'm excited to see what Zahn does now that he's had two books to build out this world. And even though this is not my favorite book of the trilogy, we've talked a lot about our favorite aspects of this, and I think that is sort of the fun of doing these book reviews, is just picking out what brought us the most joy and what we thought was the most interesting, even if it wasn't necessarily our best cup of tea that we've tried. And I think there's a lot of great stuff to pull from this. I can't wait to see how it all looks in hindsight.
Same here. I'm really excited for book 3, even though this one wasn't my favorite. I am so curious to see how it will all turn up.
Yeah. I'm bought in. I'm even more excited after discussing. So.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sarah, where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and Letterboxd at SEH221, and on Instagram at Sarah's Puzzle Pages.
You can also find Sarah on this podcast almost every week. We are covering the Bad Batch, all 16 episodes of it. So I'm very excited to be doing that with you, Sarah. We're enjoying it so far. And if you liked this book review, we do book reviews literally all the time. So stay tuned for our coverage of the High Republic Wave 2 this summer. We have a lot of book reviews coming out on Patreon as of late. And we also did a bunch of book reviews previously, so go check out some of those older episodes, especially our previous Thrawn episode on the first book in this trilogy. So as for any future updates on the podcast, make sure you're following us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you enjoyed this episode, definitely leave us a 5-star written review. Helps other people find the podcast and join the Star Wars discussion. And you can also support us on Patreon, as I mentioned. That's at patreon.com/Friends of the Force. Thank you to our current patrons, Adam, Amy, Anna, Brian, Cheryl, Deborah, Donnie, Elegy, Jesse, Knights of Ren, Levi, Lindsay, Marie Claire, Neil, Rachel, Sarah, Skytalkers T, and our newest patron, Huang. So thank you all for your support. It truly means the world. And we are so excited to bring you more Star Wars coverage in the months, many, many months ahead. So, Sarah, thank you for joining me as always. For everybody out there listening, thank you once again. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.
Bye.